Our special guest tonight is Father James Carter. Father Carter was the president of this university from 1974 to 1994. He actually was a student at the university in 1944, and he is now on the staff of the philosophy department that teaches science and religion courses, and he's a physicist by training, a nuclear physicist. So please welcome Father James Carter. Thank you very much, Father Carter.
John.
Well, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this group, and we're glad that you're here. I've been thinking about your tenure at the university, and a lot of what we know as a university today didn't quite exist when you became president. Could you talk about how the campus looked in 1974?
If you could imagine the campus without the student center, both libraries, the old library and the new library, without Stallings Hall, if you thought of everything behind Bobette as tennis courts and track and field and a gym on Ferret Street, kind of a temporary but big structure, that's what the campus was like when I first came. It was during the war years. Once in a while I could borrow my mother's car, and if I did, I parked in the Horseshoe because nobody had a car to come to school with. So it was a lot different. There were about 3,000 students. Since it was during the war years, even though female students had only come recently to Loyola in the late 30s, they outnumbered the males because of the draft. So it was easy to get a date. At least for the guys, it was easy to get a date.
So that was 1944, and you received your undergraduate degree in physics?
Yes, at Spring Hill.
Like Spring Hill.
I had 1 year here, then entered the Jesuits at Grand Coteau, Louisiana.
I see. And then you came back at some point. When was that?
I came back as a faculty member in 1960.
And you were on the physics faculty.
Right.
I see. Well, so when you became president, what was your mandate at that point?
The mandate was basically just to hang in there. Loyola had a rapid turnover of presidents for various reasons, and New Orleans was used to long-term presidents. Tulane had a 25-year president. UNO still had its founding president. Dr. Francis, who's still president at Xavier, had been in office for some time. And it sounds like a minor mandate, but the board did ask me to go for the long term. And I felt that Loyola was headed in the right direction. It was just a question of doing what we did better, just improving. We had pretty much the configuration that we have today, and it was just a question of doing a better job. The music school had miserable facilities. We're not in Roussel, but the music school today is pretty much in the location where both the law school and the music school were, in old buildings that were not at all suitable for either purpose.
So they were old mansions, like the kinds we see on St. Charles,
right,
that have been converted to schools.
Right.
And so in your tenure, then those buildings were taken down, and the music communications complex was constructed.
Right.
And then you also had something to do with acquiring the Broadway campus.
Right.
And building that law school?
There were two pre-existing buildings. Two buildings had gone up in the 60s on the Dominican campus. There was a science building and a library. So we converted the library to a law library and connected the two buildings and made that into the law school. The law school originally, after moving from St. Charles Avenue, the law school had what is now Miller Hall, the part of the main library now, right, where the business school is.
So the Monroe Library didn't exist at the beginning of your
tenure? No. It didn't exist when my tenure ended. It was on the drawing boards. We had raised the money. We had the plans were all drawn up, but I left office just before it went in, before the drive started and the library went up.
And then you also, was the sports complex built during your tenure?
Yes.
That was a lot of fundraising, right?
Well, the sports complex was done with tuition money. The student government said they wanted a sports complex, and we said, we ran the numbers, we said if every student would be willing to pay $200 more per year
Is that right?
for all eternity,
Oh,
meaning the lifetime of the building. But it was financed, the Music Communications building was financed by a fundraising drive. And the acquisition of the Dominican campus was, we had to put funds together from various sources. It was a $12 million acquisition.
you're talking about what we call now the Broadway campus.
Right.
And that was owned by an order of
The
nuns?
the Dominican nuns still have a residence there.
Really?
And they, but it was St. Mary's Dominican College. I was just talking to one of their graduates a couple of days ago. They still fondly remember Dominican.
Didn't you also acquire the Mercy Academy down at the corner
Yes.
here?
That was a high school attached to the parish, and we were able to buy that when the sisters moved out of there.
So it sounded like a pretty active 20 years.
Well, it went by pretty fast.
Yeah. And the university grew in that period too, did it not?
We were about 3,000 students with about a $3 million budget in 1974, and we were about 5,600 students with a $75 million budget in 95.
And then also in your tenure, didn't the university sell its interest in the radio stations and TV stations?
We owned, this generation probably doesn't remember that. Their parents would remember very well if they're from New Orleans, that WWL radio was started by the physics department at Loyola University.
Really?
Right after the First World War. And it went with the CBS network in 1935.
My goodness.
And then when television came along, the first station was Channel 6. Then Loyola came on the scene, and a number of other entities wanted to get into the television business, but we were able to get the license based on our experience in broadcasting with radio. When I say we, these are people that are a generation ahead of me, but we had just acquired the television station when I came on board as a faculty member in 1960. And it was a highly successful, high-quality station back in the days when there were 3 channels.
3 networks.
3 network affiliate stations. But after about 20 years, with the advent of cable and VCRs and all sorts of alternatives, it wasn't quite we used to use the term license to steal. We tried to be honest, but the profit margins were enormous in the beginning, and then they got to be lower with all the competition.
And that's what prompted the idea to sell it.
Then our board said, well, this is a wonderful asset. It's bringing in wonderful funds for the university, but we have all our eggs in one basket, and we need to diversify.
I see. So you saw the radio stations initially, I think,
Right.
for like 12 million, 13 million
Yes,
or so?
something in that area.
And then a couple of years later, you sold the TV station.
TV was about 110 million.
110 million. And that created the endowment for the
Right.
university.
Which now is about, well, as of last week, was roughly $350 million. I don't want to think about what's happened in today's news.
Yeah, well, let's hope that it comes back. Tell me about the people. When you started in 1944, I suppose that people wore coats and ties to class. Is that right?
We could wear T-shirts and slacks till right about now. And then in the middle of October, you had to start wearing a jacket. Men had to wear a jacket and ties. And
Really?
females had to wear skirts, and everybody had to wear socks.
We're thinking about bringing that back. We'll see how that works. And so when you became president, and that was 30 years later from when you enrolled in the university, then how was it? How were people then? What was the situation like with students? 1970s?
Well, students are students. Basically, they're the same, but there were superficial differences. We had been through the 60s, the rebellious years, the Vietnam years. In the 70s, I think students were starting to get back to where they had been prior to the 60s, in that they were more likely to go to athletic events and take part in school activities, and they were not all wrapped up in protest and experimenting with the drug scene and the things that we fondly remember about the 60s.
Well, so in those days, the focus of the university as a whole, was there a particular characteristic that they were trying to portray and to embody?
I think at the time I was a student, I think Loyola saw itself almost exclusively as a service to the local community.
Really?
Then in the late 50s, just before I joined the faculty, UNO was started. So that niche was pretty well filled, and Loyola started to look beyond the local area for recruiting students. We still, in the 60s, while I was a faculty member, Beaver and Budig went up, and that began to change the complexion of the student body. Prior to that, any out-of-town students lived either in some old homes that were right about where we are now, or for females, residents a few blocks down on St. Charles.
I see. So then the university became more of a residential campus, and then in your tenure, there was a lot more effort in recruiting out-of-state students.
Yes.
And so the ratio changed from
Right.
what to what?
I'd say by 1995, we were probably 60% local, 40% out-of-state. That move toward bringing in out-of-state students continued after I left office with the creation of the Carrollton Residence Hall and the acquisition of Dominican, which gave us more on-campus housing than we had before.
I see. And before Katrina, I think we were almost 70% out of state, weren't we?
I think it got up to that, yeah.
And now we're about 50-50?
Yes.
I see. Well, the music school, now you had a lot to do with the strengthening and of the music school. Why was that? Why did you take a particular interest in that?
Well, we did not have intercollegiate athletics. That had been dropped just before I got into office. The board had dropped intercollegiate athletics for a number of reasons, cost being the principal one. But I felt that this was our face to the community. The music school was our football team. And although I would not want to take credit for things that were done by some very fine leadership within the college, I tried to help, but I tried to be supportive to some very fine deans as we moved along.
And so the music school grew in size and grew in national.
It didn't grow so much in size as it grew in prominence, and we wanted the performing facility, which is now Roussel Hall, to be an outstanding facility, and the architect deserves a lot of credit, I think, for having done that.
Yeah, it's a nice hall. Well, where do you see the university? Kevin Wiles is defining the university as I think his words are a creative arts university, a university that has a certain dedication to the arts, and that is something that seems to me is an outgrowth of your own tenure and also those who came after you. Would you say that's fair?
We certainly saw the arts as an important aspect of the university. Coming out of the sciences, I wouldn't want to see them left in the wake. But this is not, the New Orleans area is not the science capital of the nation, whereas it should be one of the music capital and artistic capital. So those considerations fed into the priorities we set.
I see. Well, let's talk about your specific interests as a teacher. You've always taught courses in physics, and also I believe you teach courses in science and religion.
Yes.
And I think you and I were both associated with a particular foundation, John Templeton's group.
Right.
And did you do some work for them as well?
When I left office, I had done a seminar in science and religion at the University of Chicago when I did a sabbatical in the 1990s, before I left office. And that fed into an interest I had conceived when I studied theology. There were 11 of us who already had doctorates in the sciences when we studied theology, and one of our teachers said, why don't we have a seminar in science and religion? We're biologists, all sorts of different interests, and that led into a lifetime interest on my part. So when I left the presidency, I applied for a Templeton grant to develop a course in science and religion, and that was very helpful. That enabled me to go to seminars, to purchase materials, to do everything necessary to get a course off the ground. And since then, I've had subsequent grants to keep it going. And I really think it's at the core of what an institution like Loyola is all about. If we're a Catholic university in the American tradition, and if the American culture is highly influenced by the scientific mentality, then we need to be in that dialogue between science and religion. And I've enjoyed teaching that. I've been asked to teach a new course next semester, another one that I will thoroughly enjoy, and maybe I could recruit a few students for. I'll be doing the astronomy course for people who will never again in their lives take another science course.
Astronomy?
Yeah.
That'll be great. I heard from somebody recently that this city has a planetarium committee with no planetarium. Are we going to have a planetarium?
We could have had a planetarium. When we acquired the Dominican campus, they had a planetarium. There was no interest at Loyola in keeping it. That space was going to be more useful for the law school for a moot court room. So we gave the planetarium to Dr. Bob Thomas when he was director of the Nature Center at New Orleans East. And I think it survived Katrina. I don't know.
Okay. Well, let's talk a second about the science and religion. A lot of times you hear people almost unable to hold both concepts simultaneously. This is not a problem that you have. Yeah. How do you reconcile your faith with science?
I think it's important, first of all, to realize that many of the great scientists were men of faith. There's no intrinsic dissonance between science and religion. They fit very neatly together. One doesn't have to apologize for being a religious scientist. There are writers today who would want you to believe that science disproves religion, mostly because for them, religion is an attempt to answer questions that science can't answer. And that's not what religion is for most of it. Religion is a different way of knowing. Has to do with faith, has to do with tradition. I could give the whole course right now, but that's when I'm asked how do I personally feel about being a physicist and a priest, I'll quote a good friend of mine, now deceased, Father Tim Tuig, who was working on the Super Collider in Dallas before it was abandoned. But he was very well known as a nuclear theorist, and he said, I do physics because that's where I find God, in nature. And I'm very much in that mode of thought.
Well, where do people go wrong then when they try to when they end up with the two concepts in some kind of conflict?
There are writers who say that because in Western culture we have followed Aristotelianism, which solved problems by cutting them up in half, body, soul, matter, form, essence, existence, we fell into a mindset that divided the two instead of a holistic view of the world where we see nature as a reflection of a creating God.
Are there religions that do see it that way, that are not the victim of this dichotomy?
I would think that we could learn a lot from Buddhism on a holistic view of the world. Now, Buddhism, to my knowledge, Buddhism doesn't include a personal God, so that we'd have to make a lot of changes. But the philosophy undergirding Western Christianity is Western philosophy, molded very much by Aristotle and very much leaning on dichotomies. Mind, soul, we like to cut things in pieces to solve them, which is a good way to, we've done wonderful things in science with chopping things up. But our experience is holistic. Max Planck, one of the great physicists of all times, was an accomplished violinist. Archimedes gave impetus to the development of science by seeing that there was a connection between music and numbers. If we had that holistic view that the world is not all chopped up, that our experience, our aesthetic experience, our scientific experience, our logical experience, experience of love, these are all experiences of one person, and we are one. And I think the Buddhists do a better job of the little I know about Buddhism, they do a better job of maintaining that holism than we do.
I see. So I guess the Native American population probably had a more integrated, holistic view.
And we turn to them too for guidance, especially when we're trying to develop, try to bring what we know in science and what we believe in religion to bear on the environmental crisis. We see some lines of tradition. I was going to say lines of thought, but it's a holistic tradition in the Native American cultures, which are very helpful in dealing with environment.
When you teach your course, do you try to bring in the other, like guys, my understanding is, well, first of all, let me just back up. My understanding of the scholastics, the 12th century, their reasoning, they tried to apply reasoning to their faith, which led us to the scientific method. Would you say that's fair?
How did we get to the scientific method? It depends on who you read. Certainly, Aristotle himself did a lot of observation, but the tradition for thousands of years after Aristotle was we just quote Aristotle to solve all our problems. And it was around the time of Galileo, Copernicus, Newton, Tycho Brahe, the people who had been observing nature for other purposes, surveying, navigation, began to realize that the immense amount of data they had accumulated could be put together in order to understand what was happening. And that was the beginning of modern science. The giants would be Newton and Galileo before him, Copernicus opening the door.
I mean, Newton's been improved upon since then too with
Einstein, Schrödinger, and Heisenberg have completely revised. We used to think the world was deterministic, that if you knew everything you had to know today, you could predict the future. We know now that was a vain hope, that the world is probabilistic.
Well, when you describe yourself as a nuclear physicist, how is that different from any other kind of physicist?
Well, I think we're familiar with molecules, salt, sugar. There are molecules that we can break up into their constituent parts, and then there are elements of molecules. And let me speak of the simplest. The hydrogen atom is made up of a proton and an electron. The proton is the nucleus, the center of the atom. That is itself made up of smaller particles, and the study of the nucleus and the particles that make it up and the nuclear force is nuclear physics.
And you still pursue this field actively?
I'd read about it. Once I got into administration, I was not able to be active or publish or
Are you a fan of nuclear power?
yes, with the way we do it, not the way the Russians did it.
Well, that was a problem, wasn't it?
Yes.
But I've done some little reading about that too, and I've never had to figure out how the emergency core cooling system is going to protect us in case of a meltdown, since we've never tested it. Do you have an answer for that?
I'm not familiar with...
Well, I mean, what do you do if one of these plants fails and the plutonium is not contained?
The big danger would be for the plutonium to spread. People think of meltdown, and they think of the plant blowing up or the nuclear waste flowing out and burning up everything. That's not what's going to happen. It's not a bomb. It's an energy plant. But if the radioactive material gets spread around by water or wind currents, we've got a problem. And that's why one of the main things I worry about with nuclear plants is the question of sabotage. The engineers can solve any problem nature brings, but other minds might outwit the people that design the plant. And that's something that needs...
Well, the Chernobyl accident of I guess it's 15 or
That
20
was
years
just,
ago.
that was just bad engineering.
Is that right? So when you say the difference between the way the Russians do it, what is that distinction you're getting at?
We're much more, let me use an analogy. When we build an elevator, it's designed to hold about 10 times the weight you could ever put in it. American engineering has that tradition of over-designing safety features. That's what we have in today's nuclear plants. The French are doing it. The French have nuclear plants. They've never had a major accident. 3 Mile Island didn't really do any widespread damage because of the backup safety considerations built into American nuclear plants.
So we have a redundancy in safety that other engineers and
Right.
producers don't. Well, I hope we can maintain that edge. But then again, we need to spread that technology, right? But it's not a question of technology, it's a question of the will to implement it.
That's right.
Why would somebody cut corners on that?
Well, people cut corners on anything to
Well, yeah.
make a dollar. The Russians did it because they wanted to, they were a totalitarian society. They wanted to make their mark in the world. They didn't care what it cost their people. They had already sacrificed millions of people in the Second World War. They were killing millions who disagreed with the political system. So a few more in the development of nuclear energy didn't really mean a lot to them. Whereas in our culture, human life is precious.
That's true. In your work as the leader of the university and in your subsequent work, I know you've had a lot of conversations with politicians. Do you have an opinion about the role of religion in politics?
There was a forum just this past week. Was it here? On that very subject. And the bishops, the American bishops, have come together. A few voices are not singing with the choir, but as a group, the American bishops are saying, we're not going to tell you how to vote. We're going to tell you the principles that you should keep in mind when you vote. You should form your conscience, do what you really believe is the right thing after you've taken the time and energy to study all the issues. And I think that is a very, very good approach to. There are many things that I believe as a religious person which I can't in any way foist on the rest of the world, attendance at Mass. But there are other things. Killing is wrong. I believe that as a religious person, but also I believe it as an ethical person and a philosophical person, and I think that should be in the law. So it's not a simple leap from what I believe as a religious person to what should be in the law. And there's plenty of room for discussion there, and the bishops in this last document have urged that we take a very serious look at that discussion and the values that they would like us to look at.
So there may be a melding of those two interests that maybe you would disagree with, the so-called fundamentalists who are taking an active role in politics to strike an agenda?
If my religious beliefs tell me that peace is good, then, and I'm politically inclined and I run for Congress, I would run on a peace platform.
I see.
I wouldn't feel that I was mixing up my religion with, but if I say I believe in the resurrection, I'm not going to bring that into the political dialogue.
So the distinction between those two things is one is more specific to your religion than the other?
Yeah, I guess that's the simplest way to put it. Yeah. I'd probably want to nuance it, but yes.
A lot of people have been influential in creating this university in the city that we're living in. Who should we remember? Who do we not know that we should know?
The name that leaps out in my knowledge of the city is Moon Landrieu, the first mayor to, he was white, but he was the first to bring blacks into city government in large numbers. He had a great team of people around him. The Landrieu family, as most people know, has been able to, as a result, has been able to receive a good, strong support from the black community. And I think Moon has, if Moon were sitting here, I'm sure he would list a few things he did he wished he had never done. There was the river, the expressway along the river that went nowhere. But
A lot of communities were destroyed in that process too, weren't they? Are you talking about I-10?
No, there was going to be an expressway right on the river. The Rivergate building, which was torn down for the casino, had under it a tunnel which paralleled the river. It was used by the Rivergate as a parking lot, but it had been built originally as an expressway that would parallel the river. Really? And would hook into I-10. And Moon has subsequently said he has rethought that one. But the big picture is I think he's had a tremendous effect. This was once one of the great cities in the United States. Prior to the Civil War, New Orleans was one of the biggest cities in the country. And the Civil War took its toll, and Reconstruction took its toll. And we were a thriving city in the 30s when my family first moved back here. We were originally from Louisiana. And after the Second World War, the city, for various reasons, chose not to be part of the modern world, and we're suffering from it now.
What do you love about this city?
The people, and I love the climate in October and April, but basically the people connect in New Orleans. People are very proud to return when they've been away and come back for whatever reason. And of course, everybody says the food, and I appreciate that when I'm at a Jesuit residence in some other part of the country and to see the difference. I think New Orleans has it over Denver in cuisine, but that's not a reason enough to fall in love with the city.
So the same would be true of the university as well? You love the university for its potential, for what it can be, or for what it is?
Both. We've always felt that Loyola had great potential. Certainly, August 29th, 2005, we were about to make another step forward when Katrina came. But the entering class that year was the largest ever. The entering scores were the highest ever. And things were just, and the program choices were in the right direction. In the late 80s, we saw that very clearly that this city had some wonderful starving musicians, but no music infrastructure. And that was what gave birth to the music business program. It took a long time to get it really going, but I'm happy to see it's thriving now.
Well, now you were an instigator in the founding of that program, were you not?
Yeah.
Could you tell us about how that came about?
Well, Dean Swansea and I had talked very much about it. I don't know that I spoke that much with the business school. I think he carried the water for that end of it. But we did get a grant, and I remember Mayor Mark Morial was out here the day that we cut the ribbon to inaugurate the program.
That was in 1980 something or 90?
80 or early 90s. And like I say, it took a long time for the program to gel, but
right. So now how did you go about, I've heard a story, I don't know if it's part mythology or real, but that you were the connection with Conrad Hilton, that you approached him and he created the endowment for my chair and for...
I'm not sure I should be proud of this, but my picture is in National Geographic blessing a gambling boat.
We won't ask what you would do.
It's all part of the story. One of our board members, a high school friend of mine, owns boats on the river. The Hilton chain has a gambling arm, and they wanted to do riverboat gambling. So my friend, Jim Smith, who had the boat end of it, invited me to do the blessing of the boat when Baron Hilton came into town to do the Hilton part of the ceremony. And from that initial contact, we were able to set up a relationship with the Hilton Foundation, and that led to help with this project.
So you made the initial approach to Baron Hilton, though?
Right.
Or Conrad Hilton, I should say.
Baron.
Baron, oh, I see.
Well, pardon me. No, Baron. Conrad is the older generation. This was
Right.
Baron.
I see. And then he named it after his father.
Right.
I see. So how did you choose to do it in the music school, music business, rather than the business school?
Probably because it was Dean Swansea who
Swansea,
who
yeah.
resonated best with the idea. It's a long time ago, but I don't remember any, there was no opposition in the business school, but I don't remember that they were taking the lead in
I think Dr. Swansea did manage to create a unity between the two
Right.
schools that is unusual in these kinds of programs. So that's a good thing. Well, I just have another question before I'd like to offer it to students. You've lived a long time and you've connected a lot of dots in your life. Is there some rules of thumb, rules to live by that you've distilled that you would like to share with the students?
I think it's important to be everything you can be. Nobody has all the talent in the world, but if we're honest with ourselves, we know there are some things we can do well, and I think that is one thing that I would want to see in every young person, a desire to know oneself and know what I can do and can't do, and do the best I can at that in a spirit of service. The older I get, the more I appreciate the fact that we will go absolutely crazy if we are not connected to other people and serving other people. The service may be different. It may be teaching, it may be binding wounds, it may be making donations, but if I'm not doing for others, I just can't be a full human being. So I think those two things, be everything you can be, and use those talents for the good of others. Then from that point on, you may find that I'm a klutz when I ruined a cedar chest in my mother's home when we were very young, thinking I could be a drummer, and I was practicing the drums on I forget how you hold them, but I was practicing that on the cedar chest and kind of ruined it.
So you knew you weren't a drummer?
I knew I wasn't a drummer or a singer but I'm a good listener.
Well, that counts. Do you listen to classical music? What music is on your iPod right now?
I don't have an iPod, but the CDs in my car are classical. I'm always on the classical music station, and unless the Saints are playing. And,
But it's priorities, of course. Do you have a favorite composer?
I like Brahms. I'm coming to like Mozart. I didn't know him when I was younger. Tchaikovsky, some of what he does.
Did you study music?
No.
Not music appreciation?
I sang in the choir all through the seminary, but I did that by listening to the guy next to me and trying to read the same notes he was reading.
I did that. Well, we talk a lot about ethics, and sometimes it's used more as a lifestyle. But how would you define ethics, and how would you relate ethics to these young people who are going to be working in the music, in the arts?
Well, I'm in the natural law tradition, which kind of brings theology and philosophy very close together. The natural law tradition says that what is good, morally good, is what is good for human nature. And the study of ethics is the study of human nature. What is good for us? Life is good for us. Eating in moderation is good for us. Drinking in moderation is good for us. And that you can develop a whole ethics in every area of life by asking what is good for human nature, and superimposing on that I am not the beginning and end of the world. There are other people that exist and have their rights and need my help, and I need to respect their rights, they need to respect my rights. Those would be ingredients with which I'd approach any ethical problem.
I see. Well, tell me, what is your next challenge? What are you looking to accomplish?
At this age,
Just getting back home? What?
no. The near one is that astronomy course. I'm excited about teaching a new course. I'm qualified to do it. It's just that I've never done it before, and it's going to be fun to put that together.
Well, I'm going to sign up for that course. Is it a night course, or how is that going to work out?
It's 9:30 Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Oh, that's
wait a
my
minute. No, that's the other course. We haven't set a time yet.
Are you still teaching your science and religion course?
Yeah.
How many students do you have in your class?
About 25 now. It usually runs about 30. I think we're feeling the effects of Katrina in total enrollment at this time.
Do you have a text that you use for that?
John Haught's Science and Religion. Some of the people here may have attended one or other of his seminars here. He's a theology professor at Georgetown with deep background in science.
I'm going to look into that. Do you have any questions, Father Carter? Anybody want to know what happened and what's coming next? Sir.
Good evening, Father. I have a question about when you were president of the university. As president of the university, a lot of people believe you have a lot of almost absolute power, but in reality, you have to answer to the board. So how exactly does your relationship with the board and any disagreements that may have come up during your presidency?
Okay. If the presidency has absolute power, it's different from when I was president. There's such a thing as tenure, and there are tenured faculty who have a very strong voice in the university, and rightly so. But that certainly limits the power of a president. The president's answerable to a board. Board meets 4 times a year. It has committees that look into every area of university life, student life, academic life, business and finance, public relations and fundraising. And if those areas aren't going well, the board will ask the president why. If the president can't give a good answer on a very serious matter, the understanding is the board gets a new president. And the president serves at the pleasure of the board in this institution. So at any time, the board could say, well, thank you very much for helping us, but it's time for somebody else. And the power is far from absolute. The president, for major expenditures, has to present a budget to the board for its approval. Or for major construction projects, he has to bring the whole thing to the board for its approval. If he's going to do any change in academic programs or faculty status, he needs to consult the faculty and have their support. A well-advised president will listen to the student voice and see where the students are. The student government is important to the president. What are the students thinking at this stage about this or that matter? But I would respectfully disagree with the absolute nature of the power, but I think I know where you're coming from.
Any other questions?
Yes. I was just wondering, this is more of like an opinion question, and you seem like you've had a lot of experience, a lot of wisdom. I was just wondering, do you believe that religion is a uniting or a dividing force, and why?
Yes. I've thought a lot. I've thought a lot about that. There are people writing in the area that I'm in, science and religion, who don't want to have anything to do with religion because they see it as a dividing force. And there was a great theologian who spoke here, Hans Kuhn, spoke in Roussel when it was brand new, on that very topic, religion as a dividing force in history. How wars, the Crusades, all sorts of wars had their religious overtones. And Religion shouldn't be doing that. Religion is about love. It's about community. It's about respect. It's about serving one another. And so I think true religion is not dividing. It's not divisive. But in the history of the world, religions have been responsible for many wars and persecutions. That's a short answer.
What are the obligations of these young people to this university?
To study hard, to take care of their health, to participate according to your talents and interests, to be involved in something more than sitting in your room trying to do everything on the computer without ever stepping outside. I think those are, and then we do feel that as our alumni succeed in life, we'd like them to look back and look at the next generation of students and see if they can help by their participation in the university, and not just in making contributions, but in taking part in alumni affairs, in if asked to serve on board committees. There are many ways one can maintain a strong and warm contact with the university and the friends that have been made here.
Would you also describe the obligation of the university to these students?
To make sure that they have the very best teaching, the best libraries, good extracurricular activities, opportunities. You can't be president very long without realizing that a student is not just the person in the classroom or the library. It's just a person in the residence hall, in the local, well, the laws have changed on age, but it used to be that the students were to be found in all the pubs on weekends, and sometimes in the middle of the week when we really didn't feel that was appropriate. But the university has to deal with the student as a whole person, and the university should be able to provide for that person all of the life experiences that will help to grow. I'm thinking, obviously, in terms of the traditional four-year student, 18 to 22. Many of our students at Loyola are non-traditional. They're either undergraduates at a later age or they're graduate students, and their relationship to the university will be slightly different, but it'll be basically that it's a mutual exchange. The university has an obligation to give the very best teaching, the very best equipment, and the student has an obligation to be grateful. But no one who comes to a university like this ever pays the full tuition, the full cost. They pay their full tuition unless they have scholarship aid. But nobody pays the full cost. The university has to find money somewhere else to fill the gap, and I think graduates need to keep that in mind when they look back.
Any further questions? Well, let's give Father Carter our appreciation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.